So in my previous video, we skipped over a few chapters. I want to hit those real quick here. Chapter 15 is this conversation between God and Abram, and for some reason this involves these animal sacrifices, but a few things are determined. Number one, God says, Abram, you are going to have many descendants, and those descendants for 400 years are going to be living as slaves in another land. And even though God just promised this to Abram, and maybe because his wife Sarai wasn't there to see the animals and the fire and everything, she's in her 70s, and so she says, you know what? This is my slave Hagar. Let's use her to make a child. So once Hagar is knocked up, Sarai responds by getting angry, and the conflict is so much that Hagar decides to run away. Now here the Bible tells us that an angel of the Lord appears and tells Hagar, no, you need to go back to your master. And she's told that the boy she's pregnant with is going to be named Ishmael. That means God hears. And she responds by telling the angel that his name is El Roi, or that means the God who sees me. And so the way we understand this is that angel of the Lord is like a vision of God. It's not an angel. It's not you're seeing God, because if you saw God directly, you would just die. So it's like a projection of God himself talking to Hagar. So now here's where the Bible takes a little jump. It's 13 years later. God appears again to Abram and reaffirms, hey, we have this covenant. You will be the father of this great nation. But there are a few more changes. This is where God changes Abram and Sarai's names. We talked about that before. And the land that they're living in now will be for their descendants forever. As a sign of the covenant, God says, Abram, all the males in your household have to be circumcised. And we know this was 13 years later because Ishmael was a teenager when this happens. Now, a few chapters later, after all the business with Lot, Sarah may well be pregnant at the time, but she and Abraham again decide to move south. They don't go as far as Egypt, because they did that already, but there's a local lord here known as Abimelech. And just like the Pharaoh before, Abimelech says, okay, I'm going to take Sarah into my house, because he didn't know that was Abraham's wife, and Abraham didn't tell him that. And I'm just going to point out that it's plainly obvious Sarah is 90 years old at this point. She must have been quite the attractive cougar for people to keep taking her away like this. But God intervenes quickly, and he actually appears to Abimelech in a dream. So this is literally putting the fear of God into him in his dream. Abimelech brings Sarah back, gives Abraham a bunch of gifts, and he says, hey, why didn't you say she was your wife? Why did you say she was your sister? And here's the bit that Abraham didn't share before. She actually is his half-sister. She was a daughter of Terah. So now the whole brother-sister act makes a little bit more sense. Now we have this exchange. Sarah goes back to Abraham. Abraham prays to God for Abimelech. And then it goes just like in this dream. God restores Abimelech and his family, and everything's okay. So finally, Isaac is born. Isaac is circumcised. The first infant circumcision. When his father, Abraham, is now 100. And once again, Sarah's getting jealous of Hagar, and she's concerned, well, now Isaac has this half-brother who's older. And so this time, God gives Abraham the blessing, says it's okay, give Hagar some food and some water, and send the two of them away. And as soon as they run out of water in the desert, Hagar gives up. She says, oh, this is not, we're just going to die out here. But once again, God appears to her and says, look, there's a nearby spring. There's water here. You and Ishmael can survive. He can grow up. Meanwhile, Abimelech comes back and finds Abraham and says, I was cool with you. You're cool with me, right? Everything's cool. And I'm surprised with Abraham's response, but he's like, well, there was this matter of I had a well of water and your people took it from me. And Abimelech says, okay, I didn't know about that. Let's make it right. The greatest significance I get from this little story here is that Abraham offers 7 lambs to Abimelech, and he says, this gesture is to say that he, Abraham, was the one who dug the well. And so there's that number 7. Apparently they named the place where this happens Beersheba, which also, I'm told, could be translated as well number 7. Now, some unspecified amount of time has passed, and God decides to test Abraham. God tells him he needs Isaac to be sacrificed. And so, for 3 days, Abraham and Isaac travel to some remote place. Isaac carries the wood for the sacrifice on his back. He doesn't know what's going on, but he's just carrying the wood. Two of them go up to a mountain alone. Isaac does not try to fight. He does not try to run away. But just when Abraham is about to bring the knife down, an angel appears and tells him to stop. And even though it was a test, and Abraham passed the test, they still find an animal and sacrifice an animal instead. Now, absent in all of this is Sarah, and we don't know how much of this sacrifice montage is shared with her. I assume that Abraham acted alone, and even though he comes back with Isaac intact, that would have been quite the awkward explanation afterwards. But we never get that in the Bible because Sarah dies when she's 127 years old. So if the lifespan is meant to be 120, the Bible stops here and tells us, okay, she lived the full human life plus another 7 years. Now, as special as that is, we read between the lines to see that Abraham had to travel from wherever he was to where she died. So it seems that Abraham and Sarah were estranged, possibly starting with the attempted sacrifice of their son. There's a lot more written about the negotiation where Abraham buys the burial plot for Sarah. There's a man who's trying to give it away to him for free. He insists on paying it. There's a lot more about that than anything else about Sarah. So Abraham is now an old man, and he wants to see Isaac have a wife. But he doesn't want just any wife. Abraham had heard that Nahor, the brother who was left behind, had some children of his own. So Abraham sends a servant with 10 camels, tells him, go eastward, go find a wife from among Nahor's people. And this is a very short story. The servant arrives. He prays to God for the right woman to come to the well and to offer him water after his journey. Poof, there's Rebekah. Not only does she give him a drink of water, but she pulls up the water for his camels also. Her brother Laban invites the man back to the family house. All of this is explained. Everyone's good with it. Rebekah is going to leave and go become Isaac's wife. The only request the family made was to let her stay behind for 10 days, but she decides she'll just go with the servant the very next morning, and so he takes her back to where Isaac is. Isaac takes her into his mother's tent, and she becomes his wife. Now, Abraham, for his part, outlives Sarah by almost 40 years, and so he married again, and he had 6 more kids with a wife named Keturah. Presumably, he lived to see 7 grandsons come from this marriage. And after Abraham died, Ishmael and Isaac took him to that same grave where he had buried Sarah, and they bury him there as well.